The morning rush at the city's main train station was a predictable chaos. The loudspeaker crackled, the trains approached with their rhythmic whirs, and the shuffle of hurried feet filled the air. Frank Thompson had grown so accustomed to it all that it no longer fazed him. Every morning was a blur, each one echoing the last, as though they were all mere photocopies of one another. The same faces. The same announcements. The same seat near the back of the train by the window. He stood in line for the 8:15 a.m. train, his mind already in autopilot mode. He didn't even bother looking up at the familiar faces around him. He'd been doing this for over a decade now, and it had become more than routine. It was a ritual, one he didn't question. The train pulled in with its usual deep, groaning hiss, and the doors slid open. Frank stepped in, the scent of oil and metal rushing to meet him. He slung his briefcase over his shoulder, maneuvered through the narrow aisle, and dropped into his usual seat. The hum of the train was like a lullaby, a constant background noise that blended seamlessly into the rhythm of his life. He pulled out his phone and plugged in his headphones, eager to drown out the world. As the train lurched forward, his eyes instinctively turned to the window, but it didn't matter. The same grey landscape blurred past, just like it had for the past 10 years. Same buildings. Same commuters. Same stretch of highway. It was all a blur, a loop that never seemed to end. Frank glanced at his watch. 7:30, just another day. He wasn't expecting anything to change. But then the train jerked suddenly, pulling him out of his daze. The wheels screeched to a halt. Apologies, passengers. We are experiencing a delay due to signal issues ahead. Please bear with us for a few moments. Another delay. Frank sighed and checked his watch again, half expecting it to be stuck for another half hour. He slouched deeper into his seat, ready to retreat into the familiar comfort of his phone, scrolling mindlessly through his notifications. But then, a voice cut through the hum of the train. "Excuse me." Frank looked up, startled. A woman stood beside him. Her silver hair was neatly tucked into a bun, and her hands clutched a small, faded handbag. Her round glasses sat perched on the bridge of her nose, and her wrinkled face, though soft, held an air of quiet authority. She wore a warm smile, one that seemed genuine, but sharp. It was the kind of smile that suggested she had seen much more of the world than most people cared to. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said in a soft, yet firm voice. "But you sit here every morning, don't you?" Frank blinked, caught off guard by her question. His first instinct was to retreat, plug in his headphones, pretend he didn't hear her. But something about her presence made him hesitate. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "Same seat every day." She tilted her head slightly, as though she was pondering something. "I've noticed. You're always looking out the window, but you never seem to see anything. It's like you're waiting for something to change. But do you ever think that maybe it's not the world that needs to change? Maybe it's you?" Her words pierced through the protective shell he had built around himself. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting back to the window. He didn't want to engage, didn't want to be pulled into a conversation that threatened his comfortable numbness. "I don't know what you mean," he muttered, looking down at his phone, though his mind wasn't on the screen. She didn't seem put off by his response. Instead, she sat down beside him, folding her hands neatly in her lap. The train was still at a standstill, and a silence lingered between them, stretching longer than Frank would have liked. "Look," she said after a moment, her tone softer now, "I've been riding this train for years. I've seen the same faces, the same people, all of us going somewhere. But no one's really living. They are just passing through life, going through the motions, as if it's all on a loop. And I wonder, she paused, her eyes locking with his, do you ever stop to ask yourself if you're truly living? Her words sank deep into him. Frank stared at the window, the reflection of his face staring back at him. The same face he had seen countless times, but today, it seemed unfamiliar. Living? He had never really thought about it like that. His life was a steady march, wake up, work, commute, sleep, repeat. The rhythm was so predictable that he'd forgotten to ask if he was truly present in any of it. I'm just going to work, he muttered, almost defensively, as though the routine was his justification. The woman smiled again, not condescendingly, but with a gentle sadness that seemed to reflect years of understanding. Yes, you're going to work. But you're going through the motions. What else is there, Frank? Her words hit him harder than he expected. He felt the sting of truth in them, a truth he had ignored for far too long. He had been waiting for his life to change, waiting for something outside of himself to break the cycle. But what had he done to change anything? The train jolted again, and this time, it started moving. The woman gathered her things slowly, and Frank felt the weight of her gaze before she spoke again. Look around, Frank, she said, her voice now softer, but still carrying the warmth that had drawn him in. Life's happening all around you. Every day. But if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. I hope you don't miss it. Frank watched her stand, then moved toward the door. Before she stepped off, she turned back to him. Don't wait for life to change for you. Change for it. And with that, she was gone, swallowed by the morning crowd. For the rest of the ride, Frank sat in silence. Her words echoed in his mind, reverberating through him with growing intensity. He felt an uncomfortable truth stirring inside him. He had spent years on autopilot, letting life slip by unnoticed, like the blur of buildings and trees outside his window. He realized, in that moment, that he had been waiting for life to give him something he wasn't willing to take. The next few days, Frank found himself thinking about her constantly. The world outside his window no longer felt like a blur, it had become a collection of moments, fleeting, beautiful, and too precious to miss. As he walked home from work that evening, something shifted in him. He passed the same coffee shop he always did, but this time, he stopped. Without thinking, he walked in and ordered a drink, something spontaneous, something small. It was a decision that wasn't part of his routine. He smiled to himself as he left the shop, savoring the feeling of doing something just for the sake of it. The next morning, Frank didn't take his usual train. Instead, he chose one that took a longer route, passing through neighborhoods he'd never noticed before. He gazed out the window, taking in the new sights, the vibrant street art, the lively parks, the people walking with purpose. His heart felt lighter, as though he had shaken off years of stagnation. He didn't know why he had chosen to do it, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming his life. In the days that followed, small changes started to unfold. He called an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years. He took walks in the park, savoring the change of seasons, feeling the breeze on his face. He even picked up a book, something he hadn't done in months. Each small choice was a step towards something bigger, a life that didn't feel like it was on autopilot. And every morning, when Frank boarded the train, he didn't simply stare out the window anymore. He saw the trees, the people, the fleeting moments of life happening all around him. He had stopped waiting. He had stopped letting life pass him by. When he got off the train each day, it wasn't just a trip to work anymore. It was a journey toward living, truly living. Weeks passed, and the transformation was subtle but undeniable. Frank didn't quit his job, nor did he move to a new city. But he began living with intention, appreciating the small moments. He didn't wait for life to change anymore, he embraced it right where he was. The world felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. Though he never saw the elderly woman again, Frank often thought about her. He wondered if she knew how much she had changed him, how much of a wake-up call she had been. She wasn't mystical or magical, just someone who had lived long enough to know that life isn't about waiting for change to come. It's about making the choice to step into it, one small decision at a time. And as Frank continued his journey, he knew she had left him with the most important lesson of all: life was happening, right here, right now, and he wasn't going to miss it.